Tracing dynamic capabilities. Tracing dynamic capabilities, a longitudinal process of sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring. This presentation examines how firms build and sustain competitive advantage through dynamic capabilities in uncertain environments. Our research, titled Tracing Dynamic Capabilities, explores this fundamental question through a longitudinal study. We've leveraged a unique dataset from a business simulation to observe the intricate processes of sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring. This approach allows us to move beyond theoretical constructs and provide empirical evidence for how these capabilities unfold over time. We'll delve into the specific mechanisms that drive long-term success. Let's begin by setting the stage with the central question guiding our inquiry. For decades, strategic management has grappled with a core puzzle. Why do some firms sustain advantage while others falter? The resource-based view offered a compelling answer, suggesting that valuable, rare, inimitable resources are the bedrock of competitive advantage. However, this perspective often assumes a relatively stable environment. In today's hyper-competitive landscape, marked by rapid technological shifts and volatile demand, static resources quickly lose their value. This leads us to our central question. If resources alone are insufficient, how do firms develop the adaptive capabilities needed for long-term survival? This question pushes us beyond static resource endowments to consider the dynamic processes of adaptation. So, let's explore the limitations of a purely static view. Our previous discussion highlighted the limitations of the resource-based view in dynamic environments. While the RBV provides a powerful framework, it often assumes environmental stability, a condition rarely met in modern economies. This means that operational capabilities, while crucial for current success, can become sources of organizational inertia. We see this as core competencies calcifying into core rigidities. Firms can become trapped by their past successes, unable to adapt to new realities. This paradox implies that firms need more than just efficient operations. They require higher-order capabilities specifically designed for change itself. This brings us to the dynamic capabilities framework, which offers a solution to this challenge. Building on the need for capabilities oriented toward change, the dynamic capabilities framework provides a powerful lens. It defines dynamic capabilities as a firm's ability to integrate, build, and reconfigure competences to address rapidly changing environments. TC's work further breaks this down into three core interrelated clusters: sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring. Sensing involves systematically scanning the environment and identifying emerging opportunities. Seizing is about mobilizing resources and translating those insights into decisive action. And reconfiguring means renewing the organization in response to changing conditions, learning from feedback. These three capabilities form an iterative reinforcing cycle, not independent processes. But despite its theoretical elegance, empirical progress has been hampered by a significant methodological challenge. Despite decades of theorizing, dynamic capabilities remain empirically underexplored. This is largely due to a persistent methodological bind. On one hand, large-scale cross-sectional studies offer statistical generalizability, but often rely on static perceptual proxies, obscuring the actual developmental process. On the other hand, bin-depth case studies provide rich process visibility, but suffer from limited generalizability. This creates a fundamental tension. Methods either trade process visibility for scale or scale for process. As a result, our understanding of how dynamic capabilities emerge and evolve over time remains largely indirect. Our research aims to address this gap by leveraging a unique research design. We address this methodological challenge by leveraging a controlled business simulation, which we call the strategy laboratory. This approach allows us to observe capability development in a way that's simply not possible in field studies. We tracked 30 competing student-led teams, acting as firms over 8 decision periods, simulating a multi-year competitive horizon. This setup is powerful because all firms face identical market conditions and a constant external environment. This control over exogenous variables is critical. It means any differences in performance can be credibly attributed to the firm's strategic choices and their evolving capabilities. This design helps us isolate the performance effects of endogenous strategic decisions, which is a significant step forward. Next, we'll delve into how we measured these capabilities. But our research design directly tackles the observability problem by using behavior-based measures. Instead of relying on subjective assessments, we captured objective, time-stamped records of every strategic decision made by each firm across all 8 periods. These strategic decisions then translate into behavioral indicators, which are our objective operational measures of sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring capabilities. Finally, we link these behavioral indicators to objective simulation recorded firm performance outcomes over time. This approach moves beyond the perceptual assessments common in prior work, addressing long-standing concerns about the tautological nature of the dynamic capabilities construct. Because the environment is constant across firms, we mitigate endogeneity, and automatic recording eliminates recall bias. Now, let's look at our first hypothesis. Our first hypothesis, H1, posits that long-term success is decoupled from initial conditions. We argue that a firm's initial resource endowments and early operational performance are not significant predictors of its long-term sustainable competitive advantage. This is a foundational premise for our study. In dynamic environments, the value of resources depreciates quickly, meaning early operational success offers no guarantee of future adaptability. We suggest that firms achieving early profitability through static excellence might become complacent, while those struggling initially are often forced to experiment and develop adaptive capabilities. This hypothesis establishes that the determinants of long-term advantage are fundamentally different from those driving short-term success. With this established, we can now examine the role of dynamic capabilities. Building on our first hypothesis, H2 through H4 propose that sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring capabilities each predict performance. Specifically, H2 states that stronger sensing capabilities lead to superior long-term performance. H3 suggests that stronger seizing capabilities also result in superior long-term performance. And H4 posits that stronger reconfiguring capabilities demonstrate superior long-term performance resilience. Each of these hypotheses is first tested in a single capability model, allowing us to understand their individual impact. Then, we integrate them into a joint model to explore their combined effects. This structured approach helps us systematically unpack the contributions of each dynamic capability. Let's look at the results from these single capability models. Our single capability models, which we call Model A, confirm significant positive effects for each dynamic capability. As you can see from the standardized coefficients, when analyzed independently, sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring are all significant and positively associated with long-term performance. This finding is consistent with prior research that has focused on individual capabilities and provides initial empirical support for H2, H3, and H4 in isolation. It confirms that each of these capabilities on its own contributes meaningfully to a firm's success. However, the story becomes more nuanced when we consider these capabilities together. We'll explore that in the next slide, where we compare these individual effects to those in an integrated model. Here, we see a critical finding. While individual capabilities, sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring, each show significant positive effects on performance when tested alone, their significance vanishes when we test them together in an integrated model. This isn't due to multicollinearity. The variance inflation factors are well within acceptable limits. This suggests that the capabilities aren't simply additive. Instead, their individual effects are subsumed or transformed when considered as part of a larger system. It implies a more complex interplay than simple independent contributions. This leads us to question the traditional view of these capabilities as a unified synergistic system. So, what does this nullification of individual significance in the integrated model actually mean? It suggests that sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring operate as distinct, independent mechanisms. Each capability contributes to firm performance through its own unique pathway, rather than as parts of a tightly coupled synergistic system. We are not seeing a single unified engine of dynamic capability. Instead, we observe three separate, albeit important, levers that firms can pull. This finding challenges the notion that these capabilities must always be orchestrated in a specific integrated sequence to generate advantage. This understanding of distinct pathways opens up new possibilities for how firms can build and leverage their capabilities. Given that these capabilities operate independently, it follows that firms can achieve advantage through heterogeneous pathways. We identify three primary routes. Some firms excel through a sensing-led pathway, converting superior foresight into advantage. Others thrive via a seizing-led approach, outperforming through speed and coherence of action. And finally, some firms achieve success through a reconfiguring-led pathway, effectively renewing their resource configurations over time. This means there isn't a single best way to build dynamic capabilities. A one-size-fits-all approach simply won't work. This leads us to consider how context might influence which pathway is most effective. This brings us to another crucial insight. The importance of each capability is highly context-dependent. For example, if opportunities are scarce and hard to identify, prioritizing sensing makes sense. But if opportunities are abundant, yet execution is challenging, then seizing becomes paramount. The non-significant effect of reconfiguring in this specific model suggests its importance might be more pronounced under conditions of higher disruption or over longer time horizons. There's no single optimal capability configuration. Firms must adapt their focus based on their specific environmental conditions. This nuanced understanding helps us reconcile dynamic capabilities with the resource-based view. Our findings help reconcile the long-standing tension between the resource-based view and the dynamic capabilities framework. The RBV focuses on static resource stocks, valuable, rare, inimitable, and non-substitutable assets. Dynamic capabilities, on the other hand, emphasize the processes of sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring. We see dynamic capabilities as the engine of strategic asset orchestration. They are the mechanisms through which firms learn to adjust their resource configurations. This iterative action and feedback loop allows firms to deploy, reallocate, and renew resources over time. So, dynamic capabilities don't replace RBV. They explain how resource advantages are sustained in dynamic environments. This provides a more complete picture of competitive advantage. Our study offers 3 key contributions to the strategy literature. First, we provide a process-based model showing how sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring capabilities actually build performance over time. This moves beyond static correlations, giving us a clearer picture of dynamic capability development. We've been able to empirically observe these capabilities through decision patterns like forecasting accuracy and strategic flexibility. This opens the black box of capability development, revealing the processes through which these capabilities emerge and evolve. Second, we introduce a validated longitudinal simulation methodology. This strategy laboratory blueprint helps mitigate long-standing endogeneity and observability problems in strategy research. It allows us to study complex dynamic processes in a controlled environment. Finally, we establish a crucial empirical link. We reconcile the resource-based and dynamic capabilities perspectives through resource orchestration. This shows how dynamic capabilities are the mechanisms that deploy, reallocate, and renew resources over time. This leads us directly to the practical implications for managers. So, what does this mean for managers? Our findings offer clear guidance. First, recognize the modularity of these capabilities. Firms don't need to develop all 3 equally. Instead, you should invest selectively, matching your capability emphasis to your specific competitive context and strategic position. This means diagnosing your environment first, then building the capabilities that matter most. Second, prioritize speed and coherence in your decision-making. Firms that make decisions quickly and align resource allocation with their strategic intent and achieve superior performance. Finally, foster organizational learning. Build cultures that value experimentation, reflection, and continuous renewal. This is about creating an environment where adaptation is a core competency. But of course, every study has its limits, and that's what we'll discuss next. While our simulation approach offers significant advantages, we acknowledge its limitations. Our study uses student subjects in a simulated environment, which raises questions about external validity. Students may lack the domain expertise of experienced managers, and the stakes in a simulation are lower than in the real world. Also, while our behavior-based measures are an improvement, they are still proxies for the underlying cognitive and social processes. The relative importance of dynamic capabilities can also vary with environmental conditions. In stable environments, static capabilities might dominate. These limitations point to exciting avenues for future research. We need field-based longitudinal studies of real firms across diverse industries and organizational structures. We also need to investigate the individual and team-level processes that underpin capability development, including cognitive biases and social dynamics. Finally, exploring inter-firm dynamics like competitive imitation and extending this to organizational innovation and digital transformation will be crucial. This brings us to our overarching conclusion. Ultimately, success comes not from a single optimal capability configuration, but from a strategic fit between capabilities and context. In a world of constant change, the ability to adapt is paramount. The long-term competitive winners aren't those starting with the most resources or achieving the earliest success. Instead, they are the ones learning fastest. This means systematically sensing emerging opportunities and threats, seizing them through decisive action, and reconfiguring their organizations to meet evolving realities. Our integrated model explains 78% of the variance in long-term competitive outcomes, proving that dynamic capabilities are central, not peripheral, to competitive advantage. The reconfiguring capability emerges as the most powerful predictor of long-term resilience, highlighting that organizational learning is the ultimate source of sustained advantage. This reframes strategic management, shifting the focus from positioning and resource allocation to organizational learning and adaptation, with profound implications for both theory and practice. Thank you. Thank you for your time and attention. We welcome your questions and any discussion you might have. We've presented our findings on tracing dynamic capabilities, a longitudinal process of sensing, seizing, and reconfiguring. This research was presented at the Academy of Management Annual Meeting 2026. We appreciate your engagement.